Welcome to Frontlines of Social Good, the weekly news and views program from the Philanthropy Mastermind series. I'm Jay Frost. We'll begin, as always, with the top 5 gifts of the week, the top news in philanthropy, fundraising, and social impact, and then a deep dive into Indigenous Peoples Day. Later, in our Book Nook, I'll talk with Randy Scheid, founder and CEO, RGS Partners Consulting, about his new book, Giving Reimagined: Leveraging Technology to Transform the Way We Give. Let's get started with the top gifts. Coming in at number 5, $10 million from GECU to Texas Tech Health El Paso, supporting the creation of the GECU Women's Health Wing at the new Fox Cancer Center. The gift, part of the Building Hope campaign, will expand access to women's health and cancer care across the Borderplex region, helping ensure families in West Texas and southern New Mexico can receive world-class treatment close to home. Number 4, $13.2 million from the Wellcome Trust to the United Nations and its partners, launching a new major initiative to strengthen the mental health support services available in humanitarian crises. The project will embed evidence-based mental health and psychosocial care into emergency responses worldwide, transforming how aid organizations protect the well-being of people affected by war, displacement, and disaster. Coming in at number 3 this week, $20 million from the Stephen C. Gordon Family Foundation to UCLA Health. The gift will expand primary and specialty care services, support the recruitment of physicians, and accelerate clinical innovation as part of UCLA Health's ambitious plan to meet growing demand across Southern California. The Gordon family's philanthropy is expected to enhance patient access and help UCLA deliver compassionate, world-class care to more communities. Number 2 this week, $50 million from Anne and Charlie Quilter and their family, Maddie, Patty, Chris, and Patrick, to UCI Mind, the University of California Irvine's Institute for Memory Impairments and Neurological Disorders. It's the largest gift in UCI Mind's history and among the most significant ever received by the university. The Quilter family's transformative gift will accelerate clinical research and trials, recruit top scientists, expand care for patients and families, and train the next generation of dementia researchers, advancing the mission to conquer Alzheimer's disease and related conditions. And number 1 this week, $55 million from Christopher M. Barnett, a 2010 graduate of the College of Liberal Arts, to Temple University. The gift, which is the largest in Temple's history, will endow scholarships, support academic programs, and expand access to behavioral health services through the newly renamed Christopher M. Barnett College of Public Health. Now, this week, I'm also going to provide you a bonus gift because the amount is undisclosed, but it should be at least as large, if not larger, than the other gifts I've already shared with you today. That's an undisclosed amount from Kenneth C. Griffin, founder and CEO of Citadel and founder of Griffin Catalyst, to Northwestern Medicine. In honor of his mother, longtime Lake Forest resident Catherine Gratz Griffin, Northwestern Medicine has renamed its flagship North Shore facility the Catherine Gratz Griffin Lake Forest Hospital. Among the largest gifts in the health system's history, Griffin's contribution supports Northwestern Medicine's Patients First mission, ensuring caregivers have the resources to deliver exceptional, compassionate care. The hospital's upcoming expansion, opening in 2026, will add new inpatient beds, an expanded emergency department, and enhanced capabilities in cancer care, cardiac services, and neurosciences, continuing a family legacy of service to the community. Have we missed a big gift announcement this week? We almost certainly have. Let us know by contacting me directly through LinkedIn or by email at jay, that's J-A-Y, at DonorSearch.net. And if you're with us live, just click the link in the chat and you can get through to me directly. Now for this week's top stories in philanthropy, fundraising, and the social impact sector. This week has brought some remarkable stories of generosity, innovation, and inspiration across the world of giving. We'll start with one from another gift, but in this case, distributed across a number of institutions. The Arthur M. Blank Family Foundation, founded by Home Depot co-founder Arthur Blank, has announced a $50 million 10-year commitment to support students at Atlanta's 4 historically Black colleges and universities: Clark University, or rather Clark Atlanta University, Morehouse College, Morris Brown College, and Spelman College. According to AP News and Fortune magazine, the funding will provide gap scholarships for students in good academic standing who are at risk of leaving school because of unpaid balances. The foundation says the initiative could benefit nearly 10,000 students over the next decade, strengthening graduation retention rates across the Atlanta University Center. Foundation President Faye Twersky called the program a material investment in hope, according to AP News. In Washington, the Aspen Institute, in partnership with Pivotal Ventures, the organization founded by Melinda French Gates, has launched a $60 million Workplace Innovation Now Challenge, or WIN Challenge. According to Philanthropy News Digest and the Aspen Institute, the initiative seeks scalable, evidence-based solutions to improve workplaces for women by addressing caregiving barriers, job quality, and inclusive technology. Grants of up to $5 million will be awarded to winning projects that can be replicated and sustained across industries. Aspen Digital, which manages the challenge, said the goal is to build a future of work where everyone can thrive. In international news, Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, the spiritual leader of roughly 300 million Orthodox Christians, has been named the 2025 Templeton Prize laureate. This prize, which occurs at roughly the same time frame as the Nobel Prize, is notable because, of course, as Philanthropy News Digest has reports, the Templeton Prize is awarded, a value of which is 1.1 million pounds, in honor of an individual whose commitment is to Templeton's own commitment to philanthropy. The announcement cited his decades-long leadership on climate action and interfaith dialogue, describing the recipient as a global moral voice for environmental and spiritual reconciliation. Back in the United States, Lever for Change, with support from LinkedIn co-founder Reid Hoffman, has named 5 finalists in the $10 million Trust in American Institutions Challenge. According to Philanthropy News Digest, the competition drew more than 370 applicants from 43 states and Washington, D.C., all proposing ways to strengthen confidence in U.S. civic and media institutions. Coverage in Barron's notes that each finalist will receive a $200,000 development grant, while the top award of $9 million will go to a single winner in 2026. A new report from Bank of America and the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy shows that affluent Americans have increased their charitable giving by more than 30% since 2015, even as fewer households are giving overall. According to Philanthropy News Digest and Bank of America's official release, 81% of affluent households made charitable donations in 2024, down from 91% a decade earlier. The study found the average gift size rose to about $33,000, suggesting that while fewer wealthy Americans are donating, those who do are giving significantly more. There will be more on this story in the weeks ahead, with hopefully an interview on this program. And finally, a viral meme has become a force for good. As you may have seen in other news coverage around the world, Drew Scanlon, whose surprise reaction in a 2013 video became the internet's famous blinking white guy GIF, or GIF, has raised more than $300,000 for multiple sclerosis research, according to The Guardian. Scanlon directs the funds to the National MS Society through an annual charity bike ride and his social media campaign where he posts the meme with the caption, "This is my face," and a donation link. He told The Guardian that he rides in honor of a close friend and her mother, both living with MS, calling the project a way to turn internet fame into something meaningful. If you have a news story that you think deserves to be featured here, please once again send it along to me at the program. When you first hear the words First Peoples, Native Americans, American Indians, or Indigenous, what images come to mind? Do you picture Dances with Wolves, or do you imagine the American Indian movement, or something far more contemporary? There are many images that come to mind, especially when we're not constantly exposed to the reality of course, Indigenous life, as we were when, of course, just yesterday, we celebrated what is in many communities regarded as Indigenous Peoples Day. So, one question might be, how close or how distant do those images, those realities, feel from your own story, perhaps your family story? For me, that story is somewhat personal. My great grandmother, as family lore tells it, once rode on a medicine wagon with her husband, a white man, and she was said to be 1/8 Osage or Wasaji. Though her husband never recognized that heritage, and hence, if it is true, we have not done the DNA testing in our family, that would mean that she could have had rights to a claim with the land that was provided to the Osage tribe in northeastern Oklahoma. There is a very troubled history of what happened in that territory. You may have seen it in several books or even a film that came out this last year, but it's been well documented over the last 9+ decades. And that is, of course, the chapter known as the Osage Reign of Terror, called that by the FBI, when in the 1920s, members of the Osage Nation in Oklahoma were murdered so that others could seize their oil wealth. According to National Geographic and the FBI's own historical archives, at least 24 people were killed in that scourge. Many more deaths were never fully investigated. It's a story of power, greed, but also resilience, and a reminder that philanthropy, for example, when it comes to Native communities or Indigenous communities, is never just about money. It's about justice, recognition, and of course, the right to self-determination. I've compiled a little information to share with you today in honor of the fact that it was, of course, just yesterday, it's celebrated as either Columbus Day or Indigenous Peoples Day, depending upon your community, and in some cases, as with the White House just last year, recognized in both contexts. Long before the first European settlers arrived, Indigenous peoples practiced many forms of generosity and reciprocity that shaped every part of community life. And Native Americans in Philanthropy, or NAP, an organization I would encourage you to look at for more information on the philanthropic aspect of Indigenous communities in the US, says that Indigenous communities are the original philanthropists. In their words, giving is not transactional, it's relational, accountable to ancestors, to community, and to generations yet to come. Now, anthropologists often describe these practices as the gift economy, a system rooted in mutual responsibility rather than in accumulation. Food, labor, songs, ceremonies, all shared, not sold. According to the Native nonprofit, The Wisdom of the Giveaway, that website is available again at The Wisdom of the Giveaway, this worldview treats generosity as a moral duty. The more you give, the greater your honor. These are not relics of the past. They remain the foundation, in fact, of Indigenous philanthropy today. With colonization, however, which goes back quite a long time, as we know in the history of our country, came a different model: charity as what might be described as control. According to the National Archives, as early as 1649, English missionary societies raised funds to Christianize Indigenous nations in New England. And later, Congress formalized that system through the Civilization Fund Act of 1819, which directed federal money to benevolent societies to educate Indigenous children in Euro-American customs. By the late 1800s, church missions and private donors were helping fund the U.S. government's network of Indian boarding schools, the most infamous of which, the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, founded in 1879, became a model for dozens of others. Its motto, and this is a quote, "Kill the Indian, save the man." According to the National Park Service, students were stripped of their language and culture, and many never returned home. Philanthropy in those years was framed as generosity, but it was generosity with conditions: assimilation, conversion, confirmation. In 1928, the Brookings Institution published the Merriam Report, funded by philanthropic foundations documenting severe poverty, malnutrition, and neglect on reservations. The report shocked policymakers and led to the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934, which for the first time in decades recognized a degree of tribal self-governance. But real control did not come until the civil rights era. In the 1960s and 70s, Native activists, inspired by the American Indian movement and other grassroots campaigns, began reclaiming power. That era birthed a new generation of Indigenous-led institutions. For example, First Nations Development Institute, founded in 1980 by Rebecca Adamson to promote economic sovereignty and community finance, or Seventh Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples, established in 1977 to resource language and cultural preservation. The Potlatch Fund, launched in 2002, supporting Native nonprofits in the Pacific Northwest, and in 1989, Native Americans in Philanthropy itself, the organization I referenced earlier, created after a small group of Indigenous professionals at the Council of Foundations conference realized that not even 10 of them could fill a dinner table. They decided to form their own network, and one built on Indigenous values of respect, relationship, and reciprocity. According to NAP's origin story, their founding symbolized a turning point, moving from philanthropy done to Native peoples to philanthropy led by Native peoples. Yet even today, the numbers tell a sobering story. According to a 2025 report by the Bridgespan Group and Native Americans in Philanthropy, less than 1% of all philanthropic dollars in the United States reach Native communities, and only about half of that goes to Native-led organizations. The same report notes that only 1 in 5 foundations gives to Indigenous causes at all, and it should be noted that the population of Indigenous people in the United States is about 2.2% of the population. A 2024-2025 study by First Nations Development Institute found a similar pattern. While foundation giving overall has grown dramatically, Native nonprofits still receive about 0.5% total grant dollars. And the Center for Effective Philanthropy, in its 2021 paper Overlooked, concluded that Native leaders experience the lowest levels of philanthropic support of any major racial or ethnic group in the United States. The reasons might be interpreted as structural: lack of reliable data, small organizational size, short grant cycles, cultural mismatch between mainstream funders and tribal governance systems. The Bridgespan study argues that by overlooking these communities, funders are missing, quote, a profound opportunity for high impact investment in land, climate, and education. Of course, there are bright spots. According to the Associated Press, philanthropist Mackenzie Scott has donated $132 million, I believe this was just last year, to 37 Native serving nonprofits, a small fraction of her overall giving, but a historic leap for Indigenous organizations. Researchers like Miriam Jorgensen's, cited in AP News, point out that Scott's grants are unusual not only in size, but in structure. No strings attached, trust-based, and unrestricted. In February 2025, the Center for Effective Philanthropy released follow-up research showing that these unrestricted gifts significantly improved well-being and strategic flexibility across recipient organizations. And in September 2025, the Native Forward Scholars Fund announced a $50 million gift from Scott, the largest single donation in Indian country history, to expand scholarships for Native students nationwide. According to Native Forward's announcement, the unrestricted funding allows the organization to meet a 35% rise in scholarship applications and to endow long-term educational access. The Bridgespan NAP study identifies 3 pathways for funders ready to engage. First, recognize assets and attributes, the strengths within Native communities, stewardship, intergenerational knowledge, social cohesion, etc. Second, identify bright spots and entry points, such as youth leadership, climate resilience, and tribal governance. And third, to pursue bigger, bolder investments, multi-year commitments that strengthen Native institutions themselves. Philanthropy today is not only to Native peoples, it's increasingly by Native peoples. In October of this year, Native Americans in Philanthropy launched its Indigenous Tomorrows Fund, or ITF. According to AP News and NAP's own program announcement, 21 Indigenous youth between the ages of 16 and 24 reviewed more than 400 proposals and awarded 24 grants, totaling $720,000. Funding from Newman's own foundation and Novo Nordisk made it possible. And grants could support anything from mental health programs to language revitalization, or food systems. As NAP explains, the goal is to transfer decision-making power directly to young Indigenous leaders. Meanwhile, tribes across the country are building their own philanthropic arms, allocating revenues from natural resource ventures, revenues from casinos and tourism, to community development and education. Some, like the Cherokee Nation and Shakopee Sioux, have launched formal foundations that donate millions each year to neighboring communities, Native and non-Native alike. Indigenous-led regranters are also on the rise. Groups like the NDN Collective, which, according to Wikipedia and its own annual report, supports more than 200 Indigenous projects, combine advocacy, climate action, and capital redistribution. And their Collective Abundance Fund directs millions to land defense, education, and cultural renewal, all of which signals a fundamental shift. Native communities are no longer simply recipients of aid, they are architects of a new philanthropic order. Philanthropy never exists in a vacuum. On October 9th of this year, President Trump issued a proclamation restoring Columbus Day and omitting Indigenous Peoples Day, calling Christopher Columbus a, quote, giant of Western civilization. The Greenville News, part of the USA Today network, reports that the proclamation reignited national debate over which history the United States chooses to honor. Our purpose is not to interrogate which is correct, but simply to note what the history is and how that impacts, of course, our understanding of these things and the belief in the role of philanthropy to address them. By contrast, the Biden administration has taken steps toward reconciliation in the past. And according to Associated Press, President Biden had issued a formal apology last year for the US government's role in the boarding school system, calling it, quote, one of the most painful chapters in our nation's history. That same year, the Carlisle Indian School was designated a national monument for truth and healing. And the administration's, or the former administration's, Tribal Nations strategy, released in December, commits to language preservation, land co-stewardship, and urban native programs and philanthropic partnerships. Across every report we've read, from Bridgespan to CEP to NAP, the recommendations are clear. Value Indigenous frameworks, fund infrastructure, not just projects, provide unrestricted multi-year grants, work with Native-led institutions as equals, follow the geography, make decision-making participatory, track and disclose giving to Native causes, and commit for the long term. According to NAP's leadership, true progress will come when Native philanthropy is not seen as a niche, but as a model for all philanthropy, rooted in relationship and responsibility. As the Bridgespan Group concludes in its report, investing in Native communities is not charity. It is a partnership with the original stewards of this land. That partnership in 2025 is still being written in boardrooms, tribal councils, and in the lives of people who give back. Now, we're going to switch gears a little bit and take a deep dive into the technology that's transforming giving everywhere. And for that, we're joined by Randy Scheid. Randy is founder and CEO of RGS Partners Consulting, with more than 25 years of experience helping foundations and nonprofits create greater impact through strategic planning, program design, and leadership development. Randy's also the author of Giving Reimagined, Leveraging Technology to Transform the Way We Give, a timely book calling for a fundamental shift in philanthropy using technology, not just to manage giving, but to amplify empathy, accountability, and scale. It's a new book out just last month, and it's a real pleasure to welcome Randy here today. Randy?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to meet
Thank you
you.
very much for being here. And you and I have not had a chance to speak right before now, so I want to make
Yeah.
sure I'm, first of all, pronouncing your name correctly. So maybe I can ask you to just do a little brief introduction about yourself and your work before we dive into your book.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, well, you had a great overview there, Jack. And to everybody listening or watching, I'm Randy Scheid, and I've been working in the sector for close to 30 years, formally in professional roles for the last 25 years. Just prior to which I was a Peace Corps volunteer teaching English overseas in the former Soviet Union. So I live down here in South Florida. This is where the majority of my career has happened, and it's pretty much split between the nonprofit sector and also working in the philanthropic sector. So I have a little bit of experience in both areas.
And tell us a little bit about this, the origin of this book. What made you decide to write it?
Great question. And it's, yeah, everybody asked that. Why did you write this, right? What I saw over the last, 5, 6, 7, 8 years were other sectors that were really transforming, education, health, uh, just, the financial sector. And a lot of that transformation was based on technology and the utilization of new technology. And over the years, I sort of looked at the philanthropic sector and the nonprofit sector, and there has been some incremental growth in the use of technology and the way that we, the way that we adopt that and use that within the sector. But it's really has not. We're behind the curve in terms of adoption and utilization. So this book really talks about that, how we should, really kind of advance the use of technology. It gives examples about how we can do that. And then there's also a section where it talks a little bit about the why, what's holding us back within the sector and some of those sector barriers, if you will.
And I think the why is really important. But before we dive into the why, maybe a little definitional help here, because you do talk about transforming how we give as opposed to how we, I don't know, ask for money or receive it, which is kind of a difference for many people in the sector. And you know the whole sector. So why the emphasis on the giving component?
Because, it's hard to tell foundations what to do if their primary means of financing is not on board with that. So I think that, this started as a broad overview of let's transform nonprofit and philanthropic, but really, and maybe it was just the world I had been living in the last 12, 13, or, prior to my, my professional career in that philanthropic space. But I think it really kind of starts there, of the realization of how to, that you should make this a priority within your own foundation, which most foundations don't. And then you should also transfer that priority to nonprofits and give them more space to invest in technology and use technology and really kind of explore about what we can do and what kind of solutions we can create using technology. So it really kind of talks a lot about that element of it at a organizational level, but even like individual donor when you're walking down the street, like different ways we can start tapping into some of the means that we have.
It's funny because you talked about how the sector is a little bit, or has been, maybe not a little bit, maybe a lot behind, but and technology can really help us to accelerate
Yeah,
our impact in lots of ways. But it may strike some people as funny when they hear that foundations, which seem to have the money, so in other words, it's not a resource problem,
yeah,
still have
yeah,
a technology problem. So now we can get into
yeah.
the why. Why do you think it is that that not just foundations, but all the sector, and particularly foundations, have been either reluctant, reticent, or unaware of the importance of revisiting technology and what it can do for them?
Yeah, the only thing I can bring that back to, Jay, is the overhead spending conundrum that the sector's been wrapped up in for so long, whereby we want to keep overhead at, 10% or 15%, and there's this ceiling that we don't want to go beyond. And technology requires not just, software or hardware, software. It also requires training, things like that. So that's really the thing that I just kind of come back to is it's just not something that folks have felt like they can spend money on, and maybe not supported. The other part of it may be the demographics with foundation board of governors and maybe even leadership to some degree. If they're not using technology themselves or don't have to use it, then maybe they don't see the capability themselves and the fact that a nonprofit could use it. But yeah, I think that is a very good question. And I think it's again, I just kind of bring it back to the spending constraints that folks have.
Right, right, which
Uh,
I guess can occur whether it's grant seeking or grant making, that people have this
yeah,
idea that we've got to be lean. Um,
yeah,
but yes, but I guess the implicit part of that is that if you don't invest, you don't achieve. But I don't want to put
exactly.
words in your mouth. So maybe the question
Well,
is, what can
yeah,
technology do for us? I think you describe it as a medium for change. So first, can you
yeah,
tell us what does that mean? And then what kind of change is possible by really revisiting technology in the current context where in fact it has accelerated. If we'd had this
right.
conversation five years ago, of course it would be a very different one given the growth of AI, for example. But just in general terms, how is it a medium for change and what kind of change is possible?
Well, there's a lot of examples I give in the books, and some are sort of like race ready, if you will, shovel ready.
Right.
And one of the examples that I think is probably going to be the most timely for a foundation that's been around for say 20 or 30 years is the development of a large language model, which is or also known as LLMs. And this is a term that folks are starting to understand what those are. But if you think about a foundation, and again, the foundation that I was working for 12 years had been around for now 30 years. Think about how much organizational memory is stored within the staff that come through there. Most of them are there for, 5 to 10 years. They have a lot of relationships. They know a lot about the grants that were made in the past and the historical perspective, right? So the large language model will allow us now to develop almost sort of a digital assistant that can pull from all the records of the foundation over the 30-year span of period and have ready access to those. And a staff member could just query that, ask it questions, just like it would their coworker on site. What happened to this agency that we funded 10 years ago? Or, how was this project that we funded 5 years ago? What was the impact? Those models can pull together all the records that the foundations have now within their grant making systems. They can also utilize the board meeting notes, the emails. You can also have your conversations recorded if you like, and just kind of pull all that information together. So I think something like that is something that you'll see in the near term future, and folks will understand the value of something like that.
I know there are lots of different digital tools that we could talk about, and you have a
Yeah.
lot that you cover in your book. In fact, maybe before I get into that, let me ask you about the architecture of the book.
Uh-huh.
Most people who are listening to this or will listen to it later will not have seen it yet. So
Yep.
take us through kind of a walk through the book, what you try to tackle, and
Yeah,
how you
sure.
conquer the subject.
Yeah, yeah, thanks. Great question. So the first part just talks a little bit about why, why we need to do this, which is a really kind of simple premise, what I touched on before. The next part, I talk about the barriers, why, what makes it difficult to do this. Some of the, the overhead and lack of utilization, we're not spending enough, et cetera, et cetera. And then I talk about what the opportunities are for folks in kind of different examples. And I bunch them out with AI. I also go into the blockchain. I talk about Ethereum, uh, digitally autonomous organizations, new models of foundation and new ways of giving and management. So I cover all of those sections, and I also talk a little bit about sensors that all of us have in our phones, and we maybe have on our wristwatch that we can tap into for different ways to measure program impact. And then the next part talks about solutions. How do we start thinking about ways to incorporate or at least kind of lay the groundwork, if you will, so we can start using this technology. And then I think there's a last little section around kind of the risks. What happens if the sector just says, well, we don't really need to be very active in this space. We'll let somebody else figure it out for us. Well, we've seen what happens when folks like Instagram and Facebook figure out social media for us. It has detrimental effects to the behavioral and mental well-being of teenagers, right? So philanthropy, I think, should take an active role in the development, and that's what that last section is of the book. So
Right. Well, arguably not just teenagers either.
right,
But
yeah,
I know what you mean.
regardless, but yeah,
But do paint that picture for us. I mean, we don't like to lean in on the dangers, but sometimes it helps then to light a
yeah,
fire under, let's say, a board that's more reticent.
yeah.
So that example of social media is a great one. But what are some of the dangers also, but holding back for the nonprofit sector? Is there somebody like an Instagram essentially or a Meta who might come in and try to perform the function of the sector and do so in ways that are at odds with the way we might think they should be done?
Yeah, so folks are already creating fraudulent foundations and soliciting funds. There are examples, and these are there's a couple examples I provide in the book, but one of them I think specifically was a United Way chapter in Arizona that someone just created out of thin air and started raising money for the cause and was able to raise a fair amount of money. I mean, we're not talking about $10 donations before they eventually got caught. So verification is very important, right? Verification that there's not a nefarious actor in the sector trying to do something that undermines the trust of the sector, because that's very important for philanthropy is trust. The other thing that we can start using it for is verification, even of a donor, or verifying that the person that calls you is the person who they say they are, right? Just as you verify yourself through the computer now, there's voice verification and different tools that we can start using that, you know, in the especially with AI and digital fakes, I think it's probably inevitable that folks are going to figure out a way to play off of the goodwill of philanthropists in the future, unfortunately. So there are some there. And then one other that's kind of a broader. Um, I think that the you know the what we've seen from the current administration with clawback of funds and issuing fines. We have a fine for $500 million to Harvard University. I think those type of things are also a threat to the sector in that much of what we do is it's very hard to understand. It's not very transparent about where our money goes, where it's kept, who benefits. It's very kind of opaque. People like you and I understand that. I'm sure most of your listeners do. But the general broad public starts to paint pictures in their mind when they hear about George Soros or what is that Bill Gates guy doing with those vaccines? Like this, things can start to emerge. So I think that using technology, especially in different ways, will increase transparency and accountability for the sector. And I think it will be a beneficial for the sector more broadly going forward.
I know that there's also potentially a flip side of digitization, which is that we can seem impersonal. So, are there ways that, I don't know if you address that in the book, but are there ways that we can ensure that if we do truly embrace technology, not as a concept, but in practical everyday use and using today's technology and tomorrow's, not yesterday's, is there a way that we can ensure we do that so that it doesn't make us seem less human?
Right? Dehumanization. Yes, I think it's an important point. Probably not one I addressed very well in the book, but I do think it is an important point because you can have the almost stripping someone of their agency once you're making decisions for them based on technology. So yeah, I think it's something that we have to be aware of while we're sort of going through this transformation, and definitely a point worth noting because it can happen.
Now, I know that there are a number of barriers that you've already mentioned, and some of them might be even demographic. That was such a great
Yeah,
note, because the diversity within a board sometimes influences the board's decision
yeah.
making. That's true for, again, grant makers, grant seekers, all across the sector. Are there other kinds of barriers that are easily, surmountable?
Well, other barriers that are easily surmountable.
Well, I mean, for example, if I know that we can't do much about the budget of an organization, but or its current demographics of its board, but there may be other kinds of things that people put in the way of applying the lessons, what you have in the book.
Well, I think there's just there's really I think there's a broader conversation that needs to take place. I've talked to some colleagues who work in foundations, and they kind of say to me like, we're getting these grant applications, and clearly these are written by AI, but we don't know what to do. And I understand that from their perspective, but then from the nonprofit's perspective, you know, it's really kind of a broader question. Why are we asking folks for grant applications in this day and age when we have different ways to measure impact? Using some of the technological tools and have different ways to communicate with somebody about the work that you do. Why are we still relying on what someone writes on a piece of paper for them to go through the funding process, right? I think it's just something that's been around for a while. So even like, simple questions like that or conversations with a funder and a nonprofit about, hey, how do we move past that? Like, why do we still have to hire a grant writer? And now you're using Chat GPT, and I can tell, and it's just yeah, it's like just like broader sector conversations that I think need to happen around using the technology and using it kind of in a respectful way, right? Not using it to bypass things that folks set up or different requirements that they have.
I do want to ask you about the future, because I know that's where you look when you're writing a book. You aren't just thinking about what happened, but what's
Yeah,
possible. So, can you help us to understand what things might look like 5, 10 years ahead
yeah,
if people were to take this more seriously, to
right,
grab a copy of your book, really think it through, have a discussion, and maybe even
yeah.
to help us to understand what kind of discussion they should have. I mean, where that should reside, if it's at the staff level, the leadership level, what it should be, but then
Well,
what it might look like if they were then to apply those lessons.
So I'll give you one example, and this is something that, we have in both of these examples, Jay, are, things that we have access to now that we can start using. Um, I saw a homeless person today when I was going out to run an errand, and I'm sitting there waiting for somebody, and I saw a homeless person who I assumed to be homeless. They looked like they were homeless, sitting on a park bench. And so we have technology via the cell phone, what other digital technology that that person probably has on their person. It can measure their heart rate. It can measure how stressed they are. It could probably interact with them and ask them if they're hungry or if they need something, maybe a coat for the night if they're cold. There's, because of the what when you walk into Target knows you're there, right? They start sending you messages. So if we just kind of start building these systems, geolocation systems that, again, folks could tap into if they want, to know where a homeless person is or the vicinity, what they need. And then for someone like me, say maybe I opt in to the system or app or whatever that is, I can be keyed off. Hey, this person is someone that X agency has been helping. They do have a legitimate need. If you're in the area, they would love like a gallon of water or something like that. And it's really just connecting the technology that all of us already have and that we're walking around with. It's really just kind of moving in that direction of like thinking creatively and kind of a tech first mindset for some of these solutions instead of saying, well, the person's homeless, we have and again, this is all great. I'm not, demeaning any of the work that takes place now, but you have a social worker who may go out, talk to the individual, find out what their needs are, go back to an agency or headquarters, you know, do whatever they do with that information. A donor maybe sees that 2 or 3 days later, but it's really a way to kind of bring the donor closer into the fold and allow them to react more in real time to what is needed. And again, I think, now you can get your AI glasses for $55 on Amazon. I mean, I think it's probably only a year or two down the road where you can start having that capability. And again, this is all opt-in. This is not.
Well, that is what I wanted to ask you next, because this does sound like the best possible timeline on that Marvel kind of timeline.
Yeah,
But one risk that people worry about, of course, is that as all this data starts feeding into general systems in the same way you described Target, when you walk into the store,
yeah,
they might know that you
yeah.
want to purchase X versus Y. Some people might be concerned that if you start feeding all this information about all of us into the systems, that you somehow lose privacy constraints, or at least with respect to government or private entities that might want that information for other uses. Are there ways
Mhm.
that we can, if we do think about this stuff in advance, the way you're suggesting, that we can also protect our privacy, even
Yeah.
though we're increasing our efficiencies and our effectiveness?
Right. So if philanthropy takes a role in that, we can protect our privacy. And philanthropy has really not, and our privacy is not protected. So Amazon, Facebook, if you have the Facebook app on your phone, I really don't think anybody can really argue about personal privacy because that app will tell where you go, what you do, who you talk to. It tells you everything. And they use that information to sell ads primarily, right? And give
Right.
you content that you're going to like. So the privacy part, I get it. But unless we control that as a sector, that information is already being vacuumed up off our devices and out of our homes. So that's already going there. And again, the point that I make in the book, they're not necessarily always using that for good things, right? They're using it primarily to make money, which is, I mean, they're corporations, so they have that right. But that's where, philanthropy really needs to take ownership of some of this data and the thought process behind what we do with the information and where it goes.
Yeah. Um, Thank you for all of this. How can people get a copy of the book and
Yeah, thanks for asking. It's on Amazon. It's giving Reimagine, leveraging technology to transform the way we give, and it's available there. It was just published in mid-September.
and to learn more about your work and the firm?
Uh-huh. Yeah, probably best way is either randyscheid.com, my name.com, or LinkedIn, Randy Scheid on there as well.
Thank you so much, Randy. Really
I'm
appreciate
so
it.
grateful for the opportunity.
It's great to see you. Great to speak,
Okay,
and
you too.
congratulations on the book.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye bye. Well, folks, I really loved having that transition because I know we were dealing with a lot of heavy stuff in the first half of the show. It was great to see that there are some solutions being offered by technology that can actually get resources to people who need them, and also make it possible for those who want to give maybe a new ways, especially on the road ahead. Now, for the rest of what's happening in the series, I want to give you a little window on that. Of course, coming up this Friday, I'll be talking with Christy Coleman on the PM podcast. She's the executive director of the Jamestown Yorktown Foundation, and she'll discuss how museums and philanthropy can work together to tell America's story in all of its complexity. It kind of mirrors some of what we talked about earlier today. You'll find her a really, really interesting, engaging guest with a terrific history of work in the sector. That'll be on the PM podcast, wherever you like to listen to podcasts, as well as on the website of our sponsor, DonorSearch. Also, this Friday, coming up during the day, we will be holding our How to Raise show. Our CFRE accredited show will be on Friday, since on Thursday, we will be holding the Fall Fest for DonorSearch. And that's an internal function, so we'll be postponing How to Raise to Friday. And it's a session you do not want to miss. It's called PROST, or Proactive Strategic Research, a $1 billion tool for cultural transformation. Our guest is Ted Wynn, Senior Manager for Principal Gifts Research and Strategy at the National Geographic Society. And he's going to share how a one-person research shop can help uncover over $1 billion in giving capacity while transforming the relationship between fundraisers and operations. If you're trying to raise big money with a small shop and you want to know exactly how to do it, you'll really enjoy this session, brought to you after a very successful presentation of the same content at the APRA conference this summer. And then later we have on next Friday, because again, we have How to Raise moving to Friday, we have a session live from the Association for Healthcare Philanthropy from their annual conference called From Policy to Possibility, How Philanthropy and Innovation Can Fuel Healthcare's Future. And it's an all-star guest panel with Alice Ayers, President and CEO of AHP, Betsy Chapin-Taylor, CEO of Accordant, Sarah Tedesco, Chief Operating Officer of DonorSearch at Evertrue, and of course, I'll be there to host. Please join us. That's again 1 p.m. on Friday, October 24th. Please do mark your calendars for that. And of course, join us every Tuesday for this show, usually without technical interruption. That's Frontlines of Social Good, where we feature top headlines and voices shaping the philanthropic landscape. Really a pleasure to have you today. We look forward to seeing you again next time. Until then, take care and do good.